Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spamhaus Deliverability Live on Valentine's Day.
Ray.
My name's Abby, and I'm in marketing at Spamhaus. Today, I am joined by two deliverability wizards. We have Jennifer Nespola-Lance, so VP of Industry Relations and Deliverability at Kickbox, and Andrew Barrett, Head of Policy and Engagement at Spamhaus Technology. Got some serious deliverability knowledge in the room right now, so I hope everyone is ready with their questions. These guys are going to be talking about sending bulk mandated emails, breach notifications, something that many organizations will be required to do by law. So it's not a case of if, but when. Which brings me on to, is this a Halloween special? Have we got things mixed up? But yeah, to get started, Jen, for those that find themselves in this scenario, what questions should they start by asking?
That's a great question to start with, is what do I need to ask? And I think the first question that you should ask yourself, and it also depends on where you are in the organization, is how does this mandatory email have to be sent out? Are there requirements, or can you find other ways? So, we're speaking about email today, but I actually have one right here that is a data breach notification, for example, legally mandated, and it's not through email. So email is not always your path, and it's a lot of considerations when it might be the cheapest and fastest method, but is it the right one? So I would start with that question.
Yeah, that is a great point. I mean, these court mandated messages, typically the bar is set where your requirement to be met is that you just made the attempt to notify the folks whose data may have been compromised. There's no rule typically that says that you have to actually succeed or prove that you have succeeded in notifying the intended recipients. And let's be clear from the outset, this is not going to go well for anybody. This is not a reputation enhancing opportunity for those of us who like to talk about sending mail in large quantities. So the objective here is never going to be how can we increase engagement, but more along the lines of how do we mitigate to the greatest degree possible the negative impacts of this large new volume of email that we're about to send. Your customers don't want to receive it. They didn't sign up. They didn't want to get breached. And in many cases, you'll be required by the courts to notify recipients who likely haven't interacted with your brand in years, possibly decades or longer. You could be ordered to notify anybody for whom you have ever retained any data, ever, world without end. Amen. So the objective here is to mitigate damage. And just as Jen says, step zero in that journey may be to see how much of this volume can we offload into a different channel like Dead Tree. Kind of expensive. The courts typically don't mandate, as Jen said, that it has to be sent by email. It just has to be, an attempt has to be made. But, the Dead Tree version, last I checked, fully burdened cost for a mailing was something like $1.25 per recipient. And so your organization probably wants to do it as cheaply as possible. And that means email. And that's why we're here today.
Yeah, and I think with that decision also comes with questions about what happens if we do damage what we're doing, our reputation, because like you just said, this isn't an exercise for success. We just have to get it done.
Yeah.
So think about, if I were to cause damage, how long are we willing to wait? Is it going to be long standing, or is it something that might be short? So I think some of that is all these things that you have to consider about volume, what you send today, how long it's going to take to get this sent out. Because I know there's also time limits. It's often said, you have to get this out within 30 days. And if you're a mailer that maybe sends not frequently enough, where it's going to be hard to send this out perhaps over 30 days. So maybe you have to do a little combination of email and paper, and or you focus on the paper for those where you're like, these email addresses no longer exist, but I still have to at least attempt to contact this customer. So you can even break up your audiences that way as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would say that if a court is giving you 30 days to make those notifications and it has to go by email, use every one of those 30 days. I think the objective here is, regardless of what your volumes are today, you want to spread that volume of woefully unengaging notifications over as much time as you possibly can. In some instances, this is going to very much resemble a kind of warming exercise like you did when you first launched your program. You got to figure out how much volume you have to work up to, and you want to be very careful not to exceed a certain volume daily limit if it's outside your normal sending pattern or sending volume ranges. So use up all the time you possibly can, because you want to mix up this lower quality recipient list along with your more strongly engaged normal daily traffic to sort of diffuse the impact of this unengaging content of these unengageable recipients in some cases over as much volume and over as much time as you possibly can, so that once the 30 days of sending are over with, your reputation can recover to pre-notification levels as quickly as possible.
And I would say, I love that you said use every single day. And so you don't want to be the person that's like, I found out today and now we have 30 days or whatever that timeline is. If you want to use every day, if you don't have a problem today, perhaps make a plan. If we were to have a data breach, do I know who I would send and how I would send, how I'd break the audience up? Can you do some of that ahead of time and almost just have it on the back burner in terms of what it would look like volume wise or segmentation wise? Because I know I've worked, and if you are going to do any type of verification, to say I'm going to pull out the bounces now so that we can start on the paper trail. You wouldn't be able to do that today, because if this happens, 6 months later, that's going to look totally different. But if you understand, it's going to take me 2 days to run counts, because I know some send systems, they take hours sometimes to run counts in the system, and then you have to confirm them and then do QA. Like, there is a production timeline. So try to figure out what that is, if you can potentially buffer that in as well, so that when you have 30 days to send, you're not spending it on production, you're spending it on sending and mitigating and doing all those other things that you need to do.
Right. So let's talk for a minute about the big ugly in the room, which is the likelihood that some of those very old addresses that are still on your list that you have to send notifications to have been converted into spam traps. We're Spamhaus, obviously we have to talk about spam traps. So what do we do about that? Because spreading it out as much as you can may only temporarily slow down any spam trap hit rates, and it might not be enough to avoid triggering some of the automated detection systems out there for Spamhaus and other operators of email reputation services. So there's a really good document over at the MOG website. Have a look at it, read it thoroughly, share it with your seniors. That describes a really good standard practice for notification of not just Spamhaus, but also the other ISPs and anybody else who may be interested in these kind of large events. Let us know how to let folks know in advance. I've seen a couple of organizations use this best practice recently. It's relatively new, and folks may not realize that it's out there, but go to the SMOG website and search the site for best practices for compulsory notifications. And it'll tell you
mandated mailings too, legally.
Right. And, the short version is go to all the places where deliverability folk hang out and let them know. Go to the Spamhaus website and open a contacts ticket as opposed to a delisting request ticket that says, hey, we have this court mandated thing going out. Here are the dates. Here's the approximate volume. Anything you can do to help us out. And often we can, particularly if you have a history of fair dealings with Spamhaus in the past.
By the way, if you have questions, please send them in so we can ask them as well, or answer them as we go along at the very end. And to that, yeah, there's a lot of prep work. So there's prep work if you're thinking like, what if this were to happen? But there's prep work leading up to the actual launch, the notifications. I think it's important as you read through that document too, to understand that you're trying to alert those who could block your mail. Because the goal isn't always necessarily to get to the inbox, but to deliver. That's often the legal minimum, just
Right.
delivered. So you try to be honest with your content too. You don't want to put like excessive links in there, because I'm sure the spam operators, the block list, the filters are also looking at, is anyone going to try to abuse this as well? Because when there are data breaches, I'm sure there's plenty of bad actors that are like, how can I take advantage of this? So when you are reaching out and saying, I need support, provide as much detail as possible so that it's very clear that this is your mail stream. And so if anybody else tries to mimic it, it's easier to identify.
And we have seen that in real life. We see folks using GDPR notifications as an excuse to send, blatantly marketing messages to unpermissioned lists and things of that nature. So it totally happens. But the point you make is great, Jenny, and it invites the next question is, I have a marketing stream and I have a transactional stream. Which of these two streams should I be using as a deliverability professional to send these breach notifications? And a lot of senders are tempted to say, well, it's not marketing. And so if anything else that's not marketing automatically goes into transactional. That's probably not the best idea. Because your idea of transactional probably differs a little bit from what the ISPs consider as transactional, right? The ISPs typically think of transactional as, one of four things that very conveniently all happen to start with P: purchases, payments, parcels, and passwords, right? Anything else probably goes into marketing mail stream.
Mm-hmm.
While your transactional messaging stream probably has a better reputation and can maybe withstand a little bit more battering than your marketing, I would resist the temptation to do that. The marketing is going to likely have far more volume to absorb and diffuse the negative reputational impact of this new notification messaging. So that is where I would look to first. You're more likely to be able to bounce back quicker, generally speaking, assuming you have reasonable reputation going into this whole thing to begin with.
And that ties into as well that if you have a breach, you don't want to just like spin up a new subdomain or anything like that, because now you're starting really from ground zero versus starting from a base of reputational foundation that you have, and that you have to just be careful about what you're doing. And those notifications can help temper some of that fluctuation that you might see with larger volumes or higher complaints or something along those lines. So, I think that's important as well, as also making the decision that whatever stream you're using, it's authenticated, that all of your technical stuff is in place. I've seen some mailings that don't have a reply to, or the reply to doesn't work. I think everything needs to work. Make sure your system still works as it does today. And it's just about making sure you're tempering what's going out, and you're notifying those that you really need to notify ahead of time. And some of it's crossing your fingers.
So, and one of the questions that typically arises is, what do we include in that notification? Well, if you mean the notification that you're sending to the rest of the deliverability universe, Spamhaus, we'd like to know the originating IPs. We would like to know the originating sending domain. The usual rules here, just as Jen said, should apply. Don't spin up a brand new cousin domain of an existing domain just for the purposes of sending this breach notification. That's not going to work particularly well. It might be an interesting idea in terms of avoiding any reputational damage for your typical sending domains, but it's much more likely that those breach notifications won't get out if you're using a fresh domain that has zero reputation and start pumping mail out of it from the get-go.
I have
And
a
if
feeling that you guys could talk and talk and talk and talk on this topic. I just wanted to kind of highlight that we are at 1:15 now, so we're at the 15 minutes. But if there's just a couple of bits that we want to kind of tie up on, there's one question here that I was going to read out, if you want me to go with that. So if I don't have confirmed opt-in, should I delete the record or do I need to keep it but mark as an unsubscribe?
So I like that in regard to this conversation, because I think some of the best parts of data breaches, mandated mail, if you're talking specifically about data breach, is making sure you lessen your impact overall. So, make sure your systems are protected, right passwords, but you could get into the legal nitty-gritty about this. In terms of, can I even keep this email? I know there are some laws about how long you actually should keep it. Is it a reasonable expectation to have it? I think you need to also divide that into, is this a marketing purpose or like an experience that I'm keeping it so that I don't mail them again? Or is there a real legal reason to keep it? So that's something your legal teams can truly answer. And you can also even look at it as like, what's the realistic time that they need to interact? How should we expire and when? And some of that is going to be handled by your conversations with your legal teams on what you actually have to do.
Right. And, my recommendations are a little bit different. In those jurisdictions where you are allowed to, there's that big fat caveat that Jen was just alluding to. If you're allowed to, I suggest that you keep the email address. I mean, you've been keeping it anyway. That's why you had to send the breach notification in the first place. So there's that. But if you don't have a record of the email address, you don't know whether they've received that breach notification, for example. So I would hang on to it so you know what the status of it is, so that you know to suppress it in the first place. But obviously, respect that recipient's wishes, even if those wishes are to not ever hear from you again, period. If that email address is deleted or removed from your systems and you obtain some kind of fresh unconfirmed subscription request from that same address, how will you know that you're not supposed to actually send to it, or even try to confirm it if it's coming in from someone who's not the actual owner of that email address? So I'd hang on to it just so you know what its status is, even if you never send another message to it ever again.
And the other part is, if a data breach happens, you often may not know for a while. So then you'd say, did I delete them before or after the data breach?
Right.
Then it's hard, because then how do you reach out to them if you've deleted it? So it's a question to have with your legal team.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. I think we're going to have to call it quits there. We've gone 3 minutes over, so that's 3 minutes of extra deliverability knowledge. If there are any further questions that come in on the comments, I'll share them with Andrew and Jen, and we'll try and get a response back to you. This recording will be on YouTube afterwards, but you can always go to our LinkedIn events to watch these back. So that goes for all of the LinkedIn lives that we've done previously. And keep an eye out for March, where we'll be doing another one, details to be revealed. And yeah, thank you so much to you both. It's been really, really great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.